Tonight is the third of 6 lectures, right? Part 3 out of a total of 6, which is called the Theological Bubble, or Shabtai Tzvi. I spent 2 fairly long talks trying to give the background, because that's what historians do. Anybody can read a book, and you can read an account, right or wrong. After all, we weren't there. And it's not exactly history. History, you try to put it into some kind of a context. You get it? So if you simply tell me you were born in this and this year and all the rest of it, it means something. But if you tell me you're born in Forest Park or Lower Park Heights and this is time, and next door to you lives so-and-so, and this is where you went to shul or didn't, and this is what was going on at that time or not, then all of a sudden you get a fuller picture, and you start to flesh out the little details. We are stuck with a very famous story in Jewish history, a very embarrassing one. Everybody got egg over their face. Everybody got over their face. And the accounts are not clear. You'll be shocked to hear. And there's no such thing as an official history of Shabtai Tzvi. Both sides end up suppressing a lot of information when the whole theological bubble bursts. Both sides tell lies about each other and about, they swing the story their own way, just as every one of us do. If I ask you a question about your family or something you really care about, everybody lies like a trooper. And there's no question that this happens. It's become very hard to pick out the facts, such as we can. And there's no hard and fast way of doing so. So you're just going to accompany me tonight through a minefield. And we're going to do the best we can. I spent 2.5 hours trying to give a background, because without that it doesn't make any sense. I didn't even finish, but I did most of it. And you saw how complicated, those of you who were here saw how complicated it is. It's just the subject of Messianism, of Mashiach. And before the Kabbalah enters the public sphere, as it were. And the lack of clarity. The Jewish religion, once again, is not a theological religion with ideological precision, that we believe in very hard and fast kinds of doctrines. Every time somebody tried to do that, like the Rambam, the others knocked it down. As I mentioned last time, the Rambam says the belief in the Mashiach is one of the 13 principles. And Chasdai Kreska says, no, it's not. And the Barbanel says, no, it's not. And so you end up with that kind of a situation. All this got intensively more complicated with the appearance of the Kabbalah, because in Kabbalistic Messianism, the focus in Kabbalah in general is not on the physical world, but the metaphysical world. I'll say it again. They're not really that interested in the Zohar, the Kisei Arizal, and the other things of what goes on in the world of the physical. In the physical sense, why'd you catch a cold? You had germs. In the metaphysical sense, the heck with that. Why'd you catch a cold? What was the reason God hit you with a cold that week? Different way of looking at things. If you want to take it in a broader spectrum, in physical terms, historical terms, what's the cause of the Civil War? Oh, the slavery issue, the states' rights, the tariff. Metaphysically, why did God choose to strike America with this bloody internecine war at this and this time? That's a different type of question, different kind of answer. And so, when we get to Kabbalistic Messianism, the language that you find is one that focuses intensively on the notion of tikkun. And tikkun, of course, means something was broken, you're trying to be masak in it. So what is it that's broken? The world. And this takes us out of the story of Israel for a moment and into the story of mankind. Because we get so focused on the Jewish experience, because we're Jewish, that we forget that the Bible discusses, before the Jews ever came along, the human race. Oh my goodness, look how lousy the human race is today. They're doing a very good job of destroying each other, destroying the environment, destroying the world, all the rest of it. How did that happen? I thought God was a nice guy, created a nice world. What happened? Well, it's a gone to the story. And as we all know the story, Adam and Eve are put in a paradise, and then they screw up, and they get thrown out of paradise, and they're trying to get back. It's kind of interesting that at the same time Shabtai Tzvi appears in the 1600s, what are they writing in England? Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained. Isn't that interesting? So the Jews are not the only ones focusing on these kinds of themes. But in the case of Jewish thought, Machshavas Yisrael, especially, when the Kabbalah intermingles with general theosophy and philosophy, the exile of the Jews from Israel ends up paralleling the exile of Adam and Eve from paradise. Right? The goal of mankind ever since has been to re-enter paradise, but has one do so. But as long as the Bnei Yisrael are not living normal in Eretz Yisrael, that is a litmus test or a sign that the world is screwed up. This is the famous writings of the Maharal, who lives in the 1500s, and who therefore takes the Jewish historical, specific, ethnic experience and universalizes it to say it's of literally cosmic and universal import, and you nations of the world, if you want to follow the Maharal, if the United Nations wants to solve all the problems of the world, get off of Israel's back. Understand? And you say, how does that work? I'm talking metaphysically, the Maharal say. If you know the Bible, if mankind wants to get back in the Garden of Eden, let the Jews first get back into Israel. And then it'll spin out. The specifics of how it spins out, they're not interested in. Maybe with new scientific discoveries, maybe they'll land something on the moon, maybe they'll come with new inventions. Who cares? That I leave to the mundane and stupid world of science and technology. But the real motivating and causative factors lie in the world of the invisible. That's this whole mode of thought. That's called Kabbalah. Now, how does one do this? How are the Jews able to re-enter paradise? How are you supposed to fix the broken situation of the Jews, which will then lead to fixing, in some sense, the broken situation of the human race? So no more war, no more ISIS. Lo yiseh goy al goy cherev, v'lo yilmadu ad milchama. This is not a bad idea if we took all the money we're spending on the weapons. But we all know this, right? It's not necessary today for anybody in the world anywhere to be hungry. Isn't that sad? It's not necessary for anybody in the world today to go without shoes. We have the stuff. We have extra. But is that going to work out? So how do you fix this? Well, if you're a Kabbalist, through Torah and mitzvahs, and not through Maccabean wars. Because the answer is not going to be through battles with armies. It may express itself physically, perhaps along the way in that way, but that's not the real motive force that's going to do it. What you believe over there, that the primary realm of activity is the metaphysical realm. And as I mentioned last week, the constitutive elements of the metaphysical realm are the Bible, the Torah, and the mitzvahs. And by the way, it's very racist. The Goyim don't count. So it depends what every Jewish man, every Jewish woman does. Every time she benches licht has unbelievable consequences. Failure to bench licht has a different set of consequences. Every time he says Shema, or puts in tefillin, or helps a little old lady across the street, or whatever the case is, right? All the different kind of mitzvahs, you don't realize what it is you're doing. And it's not simply you're fulfilling the word of God in some philosophical sense and listening to orders. That's good too, as they say, Nothing wrong with punching the clock. That's good too. But it's a lot more than that. And if it's done in the right amount, in the right time, in the right way, it will lead to literally cosmic consequences beyond your imagination in a positive or negative sense, hopefully positive sense. Now I'll be returning to this more later on. One more piece of this, quality counts more than quantity in these mitzvahs. This is the world of the Arizal. Right? Especially when he comes out, he has what they call the Sefer HaKavanos. Right? And he doesn't mean kavanah like you say you have kavanah when you're davening, that your mind doesn't wander something else. It's much more than that. It's architecture of pipeworks, what they call tzinoros, and a whole huge, complicated, metaphysical structure of channels and things that are going this way and that way. It's like a Rube Goldberg machine. That's the best I can say. And so when you do a mitzvah or nevera, you don't realize you trigger this off like a Rube Goldberg thing, which sets off this, which sets off this, which sets off this, which led to an earthquake somewhere, or not. If you want to put it in a nice way, and I'm saying that I don't mean to be funny when I say this, put it in a nice way, you had an opportunity to say Lashon Hara. And you say, I'm not going to do it. Because of that, the bullet missed the guy in the Gaza war. And you say like this, what do I have to do with that guy? If you knew how the pipeworks work, you knew your soul or whatever, something like that is connected to that individual, and so on and so forth. Now look at the other way. You idiot, you said Lashon Hara different, the guy got killed. Can you live with yourself? It's a different way of thinking. That's what I'm trying to get across. It's a completely different way of thinking. And as I said before, it transfers the realm of conflict, significant conflict, from the physical to somewhere else. Okay? And that the real weapons and tools end up becoming the constituent elements of the Jewish religion, which are the Torah and the mitzvahs. And especially the Arizal, if look what I'm doing. if I do a particular mitzvah, for example, and I know how to guide it through this network with thoughts. I want this to do this, and I want this to do this. Nobody does this today. I mean, nobody regular. If I do this, this, and this, but if you do, raise your hand now, and I want to see a liar. You know, so if you do this, this, or that, it actually get more bang for the buck. So, here's two ladies at bench lift, I say before. One does it with thinking just about her family. The other one does it with, So each one is good, but this one only gets, 2 miles to the gallon. And this one gets 50 miles to the gallon, so to speak. That's the basic theory behind all these sorts of things. Okay? Now, in other words, by the 17th century, by the 1600s, in other words, Maimonidean notions of an empiricist messianism rooted in the physical world have been displaced by Kabbalistic notions of a messianic process whose real struggle takes place in the metaphysical world. Once that struggle is successfully concluded, it will then manifest itself in the physical world. So let's say, for argument's sake, we need to get the mitzvah 4,753,201 at this and this time, and you get there. Ding! Amazing things start to happen. You understand? Amazing. The Palestinians get up and they say, I guess, oh, it wasn't Palestine, it was a mistake. It was Pennsylvania. People won't believe it. You understand? The Russians will say, we owe you money. It'll be unbelievable. And people will be astonished and wonder how it was. But those of us who know will just nod our heads knowingly. You see? So that's the world we're talking about over here, right? All this leads us to our hero, Shabtai Tzvi, who lived 50 years, 1626, 1676. Let's get to say he didn't live a long life at all. And the whole story of Shabtai Tzvi took place in the first 40 years of his life. So this is, right? I mean, it's just good to keep in mind we're dealing basically with a young individual. The question which will preoccupy us is not that how did he persuade himself. That's not a kasha at all. I mean, the world is full of people walking around saying that they're Mashiach. Rather, how and why did he get universal traction in so short a time? From India to Italy to England, from Yemen to Lithuania, from Morocco to Mezhebush. This really happened, and very quickly too, and there was no telegraph at that time. So how did it happen? On all of it, you'll see. Not tonight, but next time, that it spread like wildfire in the course of a year. Less than a year. How did that happen in those days? You see, the excitement that swept through the Jew was electric. You understand? Excuse me. How did this happen? For me to be of any service to you here tonight, I can only use the tools of an historian and try to look for context. And as I say, try to, like Sherlock Holmes, put together the pieces of a puzzle and connect the dots in the correct way. There's nobody knows for sure. Because I'll say it again, there are all kind of memoirs that they lie like crazy, they exaggerate like crazy, the frum lie in a frum way, the non-frum lie in a non-frum way, the modern historians, I promise you, the grads just make whole things up, and so does a lot of other people. It just leads, it's what happens, you understand? Gershon Schollem's supposed to be the big expert, but a friend of mine is a professor in Israel, so they call Gershon Schollem's book the famous roman, the famous novel, you see? So you end up with all these kind of problems. Shabtai Tzvi, let's go with what we know at least what we think we know. So Shabtai Tzvi is born in 1626 in Izmir in Turkey, on Tisha B'Av. Whoa. What do we know about Tisha B'Av? The Mashiach, my friends, is born on Tisha B'Av. True? And there's a long-standing, way before Shabtai Tzvi, there's a long-standing folk tradition that the Mashiach really is going to pop up on Tisha B'Av. Since the time of the Sefer HaManhig, that's as far back as I can trace it. And that's a Rishon back in the 1100s, I think. The rabbis, because you always have a fight, or you have many fights, between formal Judaism on the one hand and folk Judaism on the other. You get it? You know the old story, the rabbi says to his wife before Pesach, you don't have to clean this, you don't have to clean that. And she says, well, you make my whole house chametz think if I listen to you, Everybody knows that. So in other words, there's the folk way of Judaism, the other, a well-known folk way of doing Tisha B'Av. I don't know if you know this. Maybe you do it, for all I know. What it is that when it comes to 1 o'clock, not only do you get up and you can sit on a chair, but you set the table like you would do for Friday night. Anybody do that? That's good. He says, speaking as representative of book Judaism, because they all condemn this, right? But it's old. It's before Shabtai Tzvi, right? It goes back 1,000 years. And it's this idea that hope springs eternal. The Ramban, when he had his debate with Pablo Cristiani back in 1263 in front of the King of Aragon in Barcelona, one of the things the guy sets up with the Ramban, and the Pablo Cristiani had been ex-yeshiva guy, so you know to learn. And he says, don't you know, you say the Messiah has not yet come, we say the Messiah has come. I have a Beferisha, Medrash Rabbah in Eicha that says that on the day the temple was born, the Messiah was born. And the cow was lowing, and then the Arab said the base maker was destroyed, and then it lowed again. He says, no, you could hitch your cow back up because the Mashiach is born. I'm sure many of you have heard that. And so there you are. Now the Ramban just goes on to say like this, well, just as he was born, it didn't say he came, But this is an old idea. So the fact that Shabtai Tzvi happened to be born, by the way, like this year, on a Shabbos and Tisha B'Av, it doesn't get better enough from the Kabbalistic point of view. That's why they call him Shabtai. Right? So he's born on a Shabbos and on a Tisha B'Av. You see what I'm saying? So he's born in a very interesting place, Izmir, the port of Smyrna or Izmir in Turkey, which was a new community that had been founded a few years before his birth. It's a dynamic Jewish community. His time was 6,000 people, which is a lot in the old days. Full of economic activity and rabbinical culture. Basically, the Ottoman Empire, the Turks aren't good at business. They have subject races like the Jews, the Armenians, and the Greeks who are good at business. They get them to be the bees that produce the honey, and then they squeeze their taxes out of them. The Turkish government, they dumped a bunch of Jews in this place, and it was on the Aegean Sea, and it was a good seaport, and it took off. It took off. I don't want to do too technical over here. All during the 1600s, there was a constant war between the Ottoman Empire and Venice. It's amazing to think that the little Verstunken of Venice was a world power and fought the Turks and held them off for the whole Christian Europe. But they went for 100 years war. People don't know it. And in the course of all this, the Venetian Navy used to blockade a lot of times the Dardanelles and Constantinople. So they needed other ports, you get it? So Smyrna, Izmir became very successful commercial ports. So it's a big Jewish community by the standard of that time. They're all Sephardim. They're all kind of different types of Sephardim. Some of them are BTs, in other words, Moranos who escaped from Portugal and ran over here. Others are STs, Sephardi Tahor, meaning they never were BTs. They never pretend to be Catholic or anything like that. They're the true blue ones that left in 1492. All different types of communities. And you'll be shocked to hear Sephardim are not all from a cookie cutter, so they have several different communities. They all fight with each other. Kehillas Aragon, Kehillas Castilia, Kehillas Granada, Valencia, all that kind of business, and Kehillas Portugal. But in the Sephardi tradition, they make it work. Everybody gets together eventually in a Kehillah. And there are 7 different communities united eventually in one. And the father of Shabtai Tzvi is a Jew who locates himself in this new economy. He is the Jew for English merchants, which means that the English do trading with the Ottoman Empire, why not? And one of the new ports is Izmir. And if you're English, you don't know the Turkish language or all that kind of stuff. And so you can just imagine this. You get off the boat, the first time the English merchant shows up, or the French, or the Italian, or the German, or the Russian, or anybody else, get off the boat. There's 2 or 3 types of people that are tugging at your heels. One's a Greek, one's Armenian, one's a Jew. And what they end up doing, this is how life was lived. And the Greek says, for $50, I can introduce you to all the commercial entrepôts and set you up in business, and I can be your interpreter, all the rest of it. The Greek says $50, the Armenian says $30, the Jew, Nebuchadnezzar say $10, but he gets it. So this is how it worked. And then he gets a client, and these are brokers. And that's how they made a living. That's nothing wrong with that. That's locating yourself in the economy. The equivalent today would be somebody gets a job in the computer business, or the internet. Now, so he comes from not a poor family. When he's born, Shabtai Tzvi, they're middle class. They're doing okay. The leading rabbi of the city, Rabbi Yosef Eskapa of Salonika, originally a famous Sephardi Gadol. We live in an Ashkenazi-centric kind of culture. Lithuania-centric, I might even say. But the Sephardim, have famous rabbis of their own in yesteryear, not only Rabbi Yosef Karo. And Salonika was a very big port in Malkum Torah, and they sent the rabbis to Smyrna. And so the bottom line is, there's somebody choshev over there. If this means anything, I doubt it will. Rabbi Yosef Isko is the Talmud Muvak of the Maras Sason. But I don't think that is either. So anyway, the point is that Shabtai Tzvi grows up in a city with a Jewish community. There's learning, there's yeshivas, there's schools. He ends up, going to the cheder and being successful there. He goes to the yeshiva as a teenager of the Rabbi Yosef Iskapa, which is like an advanced kind of a place. Yeshiva means they learn every day in shul. They don't have like Ner Israel campus or something like that. You learn in a Sephardic synagogue. He's an in-towner, as we would say today, okay? Which is just interesting because, the yeshivas have histories of out-of-towners and in-towners. He's also tall, dark, and handsome. All the sources agree. Okay? Good-looking guy. Had a lot going for him in that regard. Somewhere in his teens, or probably around the age of 19 or 20, he gets into Kabbalah. So that means here's a guy who's 14, 15, 16, 18 years old, 19 years old, and he's just learning Nigla, Gemara, Poskim, in the Sephardic style, and fine, Around the age of 19, 20, because Moshe Cordovero said that everybody, every male anyway, is almost chayav kares if you don't start learning Kabbalah at the age of 20. The Sephardim had the opposite opinion of Ashkenaz. The Ashkenaz said, don't even touch this stuff till you're 40. The Sephardim don't agree with that at all. And they said, you should jump at this when you're 20. But anyway, that's what he does. Now, what does it mean, though, in the 1640s? Because he's born in 1626. So if he's 20 or thereabouts, it's the middle 1640s. So what does that mean around there? What's there Kabbalistically? Well, what books are there? What texts? There's some of the Arizal stuff, which was floating around in stolen manuscripts, if you remember I told you about that last week. Does that mean that Shabtai Tzvi read them and understood them all? Did he take exams in them? Of course, none of that is true. By the late 1640s, the Zohar is around in published form. 62 years before Shabtai Tzvi was born, the Pope threw a hand grenade into Judaism by authorizing the printing of the Zohar at the very moment that he was burning every copy of the Talmud. I think many of you were here a couple years ago when we did a series in the summer on the war against the Jewish book. He burned all the same Pope, that Mamzer Paul IV, who went after every Gemara and Rambam and things like this and burned them all. Today, it's extremely rare to find an old printed book, from way back when, for that time. The same Pope gave who hated the Jews. He gave perfect permission in Mantua in 1558 and in Cremona following year later to publish the Zohar, which made it a published book, which is very rare in the Jewish world. And even though, if you look at it, the writing doesn't look that great to us. Compared to manuscripts, it's night and day, right? Instead of having to read somebody's handwriting, it's night and day. And so Shabtai Tzvi can read and does read the Zohar. The nefarious plot of the Pope was quite successful. The Zohar was not only out of the closet, it was ubiquitous and readable. You understand, the Jews historically never wanted to print the Zohar or have that out for the public. Those who need to know will make it their business to know it. It's not for everybody. Not everything has to go on YouTube, like we say today. You understand? Not everything has to be out there. But the Pope said that it should be. He meant to disintegrate Judaism by doing that. By the 1640s, young Sephardic scholars like Shabtai Tzvi could access it and master it if you throw yourself into it, and he did, no question about it. As well as the other Kabbalah books that had been composed earlier but were now being printed, such as the works of Moshe Cordovero. He's a name I mentioned last week, who was in Sfat in the 1500s. He had the very interesting situation that even though he lived in Turkish Palestine, where in the Turkish Empire there's no printing press, he had some kind of a connection with Venice. And in Venice was a very big millionaire who was also a famous rabbinic scholar, Menachem Azariah de Fano. Menachem Azariah from the town of Fano, who the yeshiva world called Rama Mipano. And he, on his own pocket, published all the books of the Ramak. That's how they got out there. So for the first time ever, if you're living in the late 1500s and 1600s, the Kabbalah is actually accessible if you want. Before, it wasn't even out there. It was very hard to get a hold of it. So it's a new world. According to what we're told, though, Shabtai Tzvi does not spend much time on the recent Kabbalistic literature. He kind of ignores the writings of the Ari. He kind of ignores the writings of the Moshe Cordovero, and instead concentrates on two books, the Zohar itself and something called the Sefer HaKoneh, which I don't think anybody's even heard of, right? It's an old text, and which, by the way, criticizes Gemara learning, okay? And it's very interesting. And what I want to get across is that here's a guy who obviously is very self-confident, and he plunges into study Kabbalah himself without a Rebbe. Usually in the Kabbalistic tradition, as master to disciple. The Mishnah, by the way, thousands of years old, speaks of such terms, right? That one should teach one should teach two, never more than two, and so forth. To do it yourself, how do you know you're getting it right? But if somebody is very self-confident, or they have a Yetzer Hara, however you want to do it, so they'll do it. And that's what he does. But to be a Kabbalist, listen closely to what I'm about to say. To be a Kabbalist, it takes a lot more than just being an expert in Kabbalistic literature. Right? Somebody who knows what the books say doesn't make you a Makobel. It makes you a scholar of Kabbalistic literature, right? Which is not the same thing as a Makobel. And a lot of it has to do with actual practice. Shabtai Tzvi gets into pietistic Kabbalistic practices, which are not unique to the Kabbalah, but were a big feature of it. I'm speaking especially of the asceticism in fasts, immersions, and sigufim. Here's the Sefer Hasidim, which is not a Kabbalistic book, written at the time of the Rambam, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid in Germany. This is a Hasidic Ashkenaz. I'm not talking about, obviously, the modern Hasidim, I'm talking about the old days. In the 1100s, early 1200s. And again, it's a contemporary Rambam. It's very different than the Rambam. And one of the things that's famous for the pietistic approach is the emphasis on, shall we say, teshuvah. Not teshuvah, but teshuvah. And by that, of course, I mean not repentance, but penance. Because teshuvah is an English word, a Hebrew word that could be translated in a number of different ways, and they're not identical. Repentance, of course, is inside. I did something wrong. I feel bad about it. I really do. And so I'm not going to do it again. In the old-fashioned language, it's charata alav or kabbalah asid. You know, you feel bad. You see, let's say I insulted you, and then afterwards I said, "What did I do?" You know, so you apologize, and you really mean it, and then move on, so to speak. You know, in other words, that's what teshuvah consists of. Baloney. In the Middle Ages, they're going to say like this: "You think you're getting off with that?" First, I want you to flagellate yourself. You hit yourself 500 times. Then I want you to take a couple of baths in ice-cold river. Okay? Then if you did something really bad, I want you to cover your face with honey and get stung by bees. Shall I go on? You know, there's all kind of things of this type, and these were Jewish. The whole books are written about this. And it's not Talmudic, by the way. Okay? It's not in the Gemara, which is interesting, and that's why the Rambam has none of this, because the Rambam in Hilchos Teshuvah quotes entirely out of the Talmud, and the Talmud has none of this. The Talmud only has repentance, done their penance. But in the Middle Ages, they certainly had it. In the Kabbalistic time, they definitely had it. Chaim Vital and others write about this, and that's a basic feature of the life of Shabtai Tzvi. His entire life, he fasted a lot. He did millions of times in the mikveh, or in the ocean, in the sea. He subjected himself to mortification of the flesh. This is not a televangelist who behind the scenes is fressing and, you know, and making fun of the credulity of the believers. I mean, he did model this kind of behavior. I'll say it again. He wasn't living high in the hog at all. He lived a very, pietistic lifestyle full of self-tortures, as we say today, which would be strange to us. They're not strange to the historian who's familiar with the pre-modern world, pre-modern Jewish world. This is very common. It was the Baal Shem Tov who sort of like did away with this 100 years later, but the time I'm talking about, this was very popular and very satisfying. And so let's get this straight. Shabtai Tzvi, throughout his career, is a guy who fasts a lot. They talk about him going from Shabbos to Shabbos without eating. And, you know, I don't know how they do that, but they did it. Now, we know cases where people tried to do it and died, but we also know cases where people tried to do it and did do it. So it's, you're talking about a will and, control of yourself and things like that. He flagellates a lot in an attempt to crush the Gashmi Sinim and to earn revelation. Because if it's done in the context of Kabbalah, it's not simply about getting rid of your sins. It's removing the impediment that any kind of materiality and maybe sin has to attaining higher enlightenment. Or let's be very frank, to getting prophecy. Let's cut the baloney. to getting messages from upstairs. And that's what it's all about. The thing that's blocked, anybody can do it, but you have to have the will. You can do it, I can do it, but we're fat, lazy Americans, we can't do it without our hamburger, so it'll never happen. These ways, they say like this: throw all that over the side, and life consists of a journey to prophecy. So he's not the only one that did it, but I'm trying to give you an idea of who he is. On the other hand, he may not be a phony, but he's not a regular Joe either. You can interpret his irregularity, is what I'm talking about. He's not a regular person, positively, and many young B'nai Torah do, and they gathered him as disciples. One of the ways he always attracted a following wherever he went was by modeling a real lifestyle. They said, look at this guy. The guy does not eat. He can sit for hours and say Tehillim or learn this or that and the other. We're watching him. You know what I mean? He's in the base medrash all day long. The guy doesn't eat breakfast, he doesn't eat lunch, he doesn't eat supper. And he's, like I said before, he doesn't have a cell phone, so he's really doing this kind of stuff. So you could say positively, they learned together Nigla and Nister, Talmud or Kabbalah, all kinds of different matters. They follow his model, and they get into fasting and toiveling a lot. Especially, he didn't like going to mikveh, he liked to go to the ocean or the Aegean Sea, because it's a seaport, it's a beautiful coastline. Used to go there a whole lot. You see how this thing is forming. But you could also interpret his irregularity negatively or bizarrely. For example, he gets married at the age of 21, but within a very short time, the girl asks for a get because he never even attempted to consummate their marriage. He gets married a little bit later, exact same thing. He gets divorced in a very short time. This leads to all kinds of speculations. You understand? No, but it's true. By the way, long before Sigmund Freud was born, Yaakov Emden has a book called Sefer Torah's HaKanos, where he exactly gives a Freudian interpretation of Shabtai Tzvi. But that's a little reductionist. I'm not throwing it aside because I think it's a key element of who he was. But nevertheless, it's not all due to that sort of thing. Not to get too Freudian, we're told Shabtai Tzvi had an accident of some kind when he was young. This is what his own followers write. When he was young, he had an accident which caused significant medical damage to sensitive portions of his anatomy. And this could explain his strange subsequent behavior. But as I said before, it's a little bit too reductionist. But there's no question there's something connected with all that. Because of his, don't throw that away, because that's going to be a part of his career. Because of his piety, scholarship, good looks, and personal charisma, young yeshiva and kollel types form a circle around him, a chevra. So imagine a bunch of guys get together in the city of Izmir, in a shul by themselves, every day. Sometimes they learn together in good weather in the forest outside of town. Sometimes on the pretty seashore away from everybody else. This is a cult. Do you see it? You always get together, it's the same guys, nobody else. They learn, but it's always out, in the forest away from everybody else. It's always doing their own thing. This is the beginning of a cult. I mean, why are you different? Why are you separate from everybody else? Either you're weird, which you'll never admit, or it's because everyone else is inferior to you in some way. It was clear that in a community like Izmir, which was a significant Makom Torah, a group like this could not say, only we know how to learn Gemara, Rashi, and Tosas. This wasn't true. Shabtai Tzvi knew how to learn, but he wasn't what you call a first-rank rabbinical scholar. You don't have to be. Second rank is also good. But the rabbis and people, there are guys in yeshivas and kollels who could learn better than him. So people aren't going to be attracted to this guy because that's going to be the most advanced, like they went to Chaim Brisker or something like that. So if they're not doing that, then it's got to be that they have something special, not in the Gemara Nigla area, but in another area. Now, Izmir was not Tzfat. You could make the argument that everyone else in town was inferior in Kabbalah, both in intellectual comprehension of the meaning of the texts and fulfilling the ascetic regimen that I've described, without which one cannot gain higher understanding of Kabbalah. Like I said before, if you're not willing to throw away the hamburger and fast all week after week, and do this and stay up at night and and go to mikvah all the time and that sort of thing, you're not going to merit it. As soon as you're talking about a group that keeps to itself and keeps itself superior in metaphysics to everybody else, it's a cult. Okay? It's a cult. In a cult, the leader is El Supremo. Agreed? That's the point of a cult. The leader is Mr. Perfect. In a Kabbalistic cult, we call that the Mashiach. Right? Steinsaltz once said something that caught my attention. He said, if you go to insane asylums, nut houses, in Christian countries and in Israel, you see one big difference because they have the same kind of phenomena. But he says, in America, you go to asylum, everybody says, I guess, I'm God. You go in Baltimore, people say, I'm God. You go in Israel, a Jew, by definition, is culturally, brainwashed. Nobody says, I'm God, but they're all the Mashiach. Which is interesting insight. And so if you're El Magnifico, and you know more than anybody else, then the people around you are, beyond veneration. And this is what's expected. And by the way, it was inevitable that there's going to be a cult when the leader is not married. He didn't have a wife to say, take out the trash. Right? If he would have been married, take it from me, he wouldn't have had delusions of grandeur. Now, now it's important to remember, I see some nervous laughs out there. Now it's important to remember, Shabtai Tzvi was not an insubstantial guy. He knew a lot, as I said before. And in another life, he would have made a great Maggid, right? Or a Hasidic Rebbe, a Morad Agadata. He knew these. We have recorded sermons and speeches, things he gave. He's very imaginative. He knows how to take psukim or passages in the Talmud or the Zohar and weave it this way or that way. He knows how to take psukim in the Bible, do gematrias, all that sort of thing. The area of what they call the Maggid. You understand? There's a thing called the rabbi, and his job is to deal with the boring legalities. So we call it the Gemara and the Poskim and things like that. And then there's a guy supposed to give the speeches and bring you to the world of the Agadata. There's no question, had things been different, he would have been a successful and famous Maggid of his type. So he was talented in that area. On the other hand, I think there's no question he clearly seems to have been, seriously bipolar, with tremendous swings between manic behavior and debilitating depression, which he interpreted as divinely sent feelings. Now, this is true to the end of his life. And his own followers, along with everybody else, write about this constantly. They just don't call it with the 20th century secular terminology like manic depressive. But they say he had his high moods and his dark moods. There are times when the klipos and the demons are pursuing him, and he just retreats totally himself, and he's inaccessible. And then there are other times when he's on fire, they write, and he would sing songs and do crazy things, but also amid the crazy things would have brilliant insights. And then he would say a tefillah and his face was on fire. Everybody writes about the fact that when he would sing a Tehillim, his face on fire, you can't look at him, it's amazing. And then in between you get the normal. And when in the normal they say, why'd you do that? And he said, I didn't even know I did that. And, listen, manic depression, not funny. Okay? Chas v'shalom and all that, it's not funny. But it's true. They don't remember. They're not responsible. And so, in the 16th or 17th century, better yet, they don't talk about bipolar, right? They talk about different categories of analysis of the problem. And especially if somebody's into Kabbalah and a world of the metaphysics, which is inhabited by good forces and bad forces of one kind or another. These issues, which his people talk about and others talk about, these high moments, these very dark moments. By the way, sometimes he's depressed for a month. Right? And sometimes they get him a called he'ora, when he's lit up, so he gets illumination. And sometimes they're normal. And when he was normal, by the way, he was very charming and charismatic. He's a gentleman, a diplomat, an impressive type individual. And then there are the other times. These are not just divinely sent, as he sees it, and his followers eventually. The terrible waves of depression which recurred for the rest of his life were interpreted by himself and later by his followers as attacks and tortures by the dark forces to prevent him from reaching ever higher levels of comprehension of God and thereby bringing about the final redemption and the death of death. See, he's reach, as he sees it, he's doing such amazing things that eventually he's going to bring about the tikkun of the world. And one of the things that's going to happen is, also Kadosh Baruch Hu v'shachat es malcha mavis. And all evil will disappear. And evil doesn't want to disappear. And so they're fighting to prevent it. I mean, that's their job. They're fighting to prevent this. And the way they're doing it is by attacking the mind, literally playing mind game with this poor fellow. Now, either that's true or it's not. But if it is true, it's quite a cosmic statement. Now, on the 21st of Sivan in 1648, that's the summer, right? Just finished Sivan not long ago, Shavuos time. At the age of 22, in a manic mood, in Izmir, in Turkey, he's not married, he gets a dream that he's the Mashiach. I think it's a culmination of everything we've been talking about. Because this is a person who in some respects has to be pitied. I mean, let's put it this way, had a lot of pain in life. And like I said before, I think we all know people and this and the other struggle with these issues. It is not funny at all. And didn't have any medicine in those days either. So it was not funny at all. And the culmination of all this, and in between he's learning Zohar and he's learning Sefer HaKana. He gets messy, he's a Mashiach. And as I said, I think it's a culmination of all that's going on. On the other hand, this is exactly the middle of the month of Sivan in 1648 is exactly when news hits Turkey of the Cossack Massacres going on at that time and the arrival of the first wave of Jewish slaves. 1648, as you know, is Gzeres Tachvatat. Here's where, look, right here is Izmir, where Shabtai Tzvi is living. Here, not that far away, is where Khmelnytsky is killing everybody. As you can see, this area is the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, where the Ukrainians are going wild and shechting and torturing all the Jews. Over here is the Khanate of Crimea. These are the Muslims. At that time, were allies with Khmelnytsky to fight the Poles. Again, the Khmelnytsky's great accomplishment was to forge an alliance between the Ukrainians and the Muslims on the one hand against the Catholic Poles. And if you're Jewish at that time, if you fall in the hands of the Ukrainians, they literally slice you to bits. And if you fall in the hands of the Muslims, if you're old and decrepit, they kill you right away. But if you're not, and you have any kind of value whatsoever in the slave market, then you're okay, because what they're going to do is take you over here and send you here, and then take you down to here and sell you in the slave markets of the Ottoman Empire, which is good for them because there you have Jewish communities. And eventually the Jewish communities get swamped with slaves. They can't afford to buy everybody out. But in the beginning they could. And this is life in 1648 to 1652. If you're a Sephardi, you get it? Every community, I've talked about this before, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. Every Jewish community in history in the old days had a Pidyon Shavuim committee, because that's what life is. That's what life is. And you know, if Berlin doesn't handle the Shavuim from Poland, Poland won't handle the Shavuim from Berlin, so to speak. So everybody's got to have a Pidyon. But on the other hand, funds are limited in any kehillah. You raise so and so much money from taxes. You can't spend endless money on it. So there's a budgeting process of a kehillah in which there's an executive board everywhere in the world, and the executive board, for argument's sake, let's say they're taking 100,000 ducats as Jewish taxes here. Well, 50, 60, let's say 50,000 goes to the king. I mean, that's the way it goes. You take off the taxes off the top. From the other 50, you spend all the money for the Jewish community. It's a lot of needs in the Jewish community, right? The shuls, the Chavar Kadisha, the kashrus, all kind of things like that. They didn't spend money on chinuch, but everything else they spend money on. And the Eruv, and the local anti-Semitism to deal with that. So yeah, 50,000, it doesn't go that far. How much can you put aside for Pidyon Shavuim? The answer is, I'm just making this up, let's say 10,000 ducats. Okay, 10,000 ducats goes as far as it goes. And typically speaking, the Mediterranean, the Black Sea is full of pirates all the time for hundreds and hundreds of years. And pirates capture ships, and among the people they capture are Jews, and the pirates will dump the Jews at the next port, and there'll be usually a Jewish community at that port, and the Jewish community has that 10,000 to spend on, ransoming off captives, which means, by the way, that they find themselves in that Sophie's Choice type situation, in which you have to decide who you're going to spend the money on, correct? And, you have young people, you have old people, you have this, that, and the other. The Talmud has a pecking order of who goes first, but, that doesn't mean they always listen to it. And if you're Shabtai Tzvi, this is the hot news that's going throughout the Sephardic communities in the summer of 1648. And we know that the year Tavches was one of those messianic years that people have been talking about forever. I mentioned the last two classes that I gave, last two lectures over here. Everybody took a guess when the Mashiach is coming. And a lot of it has to do with gematrias. Katzti b'chayim ebnei benos ches. Ches is Tavches, right? What do you call it? 1648 backwards. And various other combinations. Zos is also, Tavches, isn't it? Okay? B'shnas hayovel hazos, toshuv yishal el makomo. People darshan in all the ways that they did. And so many Jews around the world, especially anywhere in the world, thought 1648 is going to see the coming Mashiach. And instead came the Holocaust. So, that blew that one away, or maybe it didn't. Maybe, especially if you're living in 1648, maybe it's the beginning of the Messianic process. It's what's called the Chevli Mashiach, the Ikvus and Mashiach, which we're told will be very bloody. We talked about that before, right? It's go, then it fits like a package. Done it. It's 1648, Mashiach comes, and all of a sudden 100,000 Jews get shechted in the Ukraine. Oh, it's Mashiach time. I'm simply trying to show you, don't be surprised as a guy who has dreams and bipolar and this and that and the other, is learning the Zohar all the time, and is thinking about himself as the head of a cult, might say like this, it's Taket Ikvus Mashiach. The Ikvus, the Chevli Mashiach will be in Poland, and the appearance of the Messiah, Izmir. Could be. So, I know this is very strange from the way we think this audience in Baltimore in July of 2015. We live in a different world with different glasses. But your job, whenever I give a talk here, is to take off the glasses, put on a separate set of glasses, try to understand how people saw it at that time. And that's what I'm trying to do. So, look, here's how people imagine Shabtai Tzvi, right? He's a Jewish Khmelnytsky, riding on a horse, and he'll lead the Jewish armies. He's a Mashiach. He's going to be on, he'll lead the Jews out to liberation. Oh boy, I'm sure they say like this. He's going to gather the Jews. He's going to go to Ukraine, kill all the Cossacks, kill all the Tatars. Then it's the turn of the Pope, right? And then we go down the line. That's how to imagine it, you see? Now, nothing really happened out of all this. Because at the end of the day, this is a dream a single individual guy had. And the story of Shabtai Tzvi is not in 1648, but 18 years later. But it's a foreshadowing of the fact that in his mind at least, these waves are surging, and they kind of make sense if you buy into certain axioms. That's the problem. But he does start to do, in his manic moods, certain very weird things. One of them is, he go to Shul, and remember, he's a Talmud Chacham, he has a place in Shul and all the rest of it, and you start pronouncing the name of God, the Yud Kei Vav Kei. Oh, you're not allowed to do that. Oh, really? The Gemara says, in the time of Mashiach, then they'll be able to do it. Well, guess what? I can do it. You understand? We don't usually pronounce the Yud and the Hey and the Vav, but the Gemara says over there in that passage, in the Mashiach time, then it'll be different. So now that's it. Now the rabbi of the community and the others rebuke him, and they say, "What are you doing?" I mean, you can just imagine a scandal something like this makes. But by this time, they see it as a bipolar thing, and he's into one of his spasms. And if a Nevich person would wander into one of our shuls and do the same thing, especially if the person was a learned rabbi who had problems, that's more of a Nevich than anything else. You wouldn't go and shoot him. I mean, I've known in my time, and some of you have also, people who were serious scholars and had, different psychological and other issues. And if they ever did anything weird, people, if you ignore it to some degree, if possible. To complicate matters, when he wasn't manic or depressive, he was normal. At such times, he honestly could not explain what made him do the weird things. So they said to him, what did you yesterday on Friday night? You came to the shul and you said, name Hashem. He said, I don't know why I did it. And he didn't. It was the truth. This demonstrated to people he really was normal, but had spells, unfortunately, which made him do crazy things for which the guy cannot be held responsible because that's the way it goes. We don't hold people today responsible for things they do when they're in certain psychological states. It's sad more than anything else. But his small group of disciples interpret it his way and not the bipolar way. They don't say we're following a guy with serious issues. This is the 17th century. They see him as a superior Kabbalist, sadly under attack by demonic forces trying to prevent him from an Aliyah Ruchanit, which is known in the Bible. What does it say about King Saul? Right? He exhibited these tendencies, but the Torah says specifically it wasn't that he was cracking up, Ruach Ra b'Yasum Hashem. That this is part of the punishment of Saul after he failed to wipe out Amalek. So, did he crack up? Yes, he cracked up. That was the punishment. Meaning it wasn't what we call clinical or something like this. This was sent divinely. So that's already a high madrega, so to speak. And he's another King Saul. And consequently, when a year later, in 1650 or so, Shabtai Tzvi goes toiveling in the ocean or the sea, as he did all the time, not the mikvah, and he almost drowns because he got caught in an undertow. His escape is, to his group, accorded cosmic significance, and his followers make it a Purim, the 16th of Kislev, right? Tesayin Kislev, which is Shabbatin, that's like one of the most foremost holidays. And by the way, it's preceded by a Tainus Esther, you know what I mean? That was the day before, when the 15th of Kislev, you have to fast. They model it all these, because let me put it this way. You say that was a dumb swimming accident. No, it wasn't a dumb swimming accident. They were out to get him, and miraculously he was saved. You get it? The dark forces, the Sitra Achra, was out to get him, but it was saved. And so it's how you interpret the phenomenon. The thing is, if he would have been a loner, a guy by himself, the community would simply have tolerated him as a nebuch, a nut, particularly if his family was well-to-do and well-connected, which they were. The problem is he was not a loner, he had disciples. This gave things a different aspect. It made it a kat, a sect, or a cult as we would call it today. This threatened the Izmir community as it was attracting regular people and was ruining them. So people, I'm sure, came to the rabbi and said, I guess, you got to do something. My son now joined this group. My son is 15, 16, or 14, or something like this, and I can't talk to him. And, he doesn't listen to us. As happens with a cult, right? And Rabbi Yitzkafa, Rabbi Lapapa, Rabbi Chaim Ben Benista, we'll do something over here. Now, all this is, as I say, profoundly the situation. In one of his moods, he tells his followers he's going to make the sun stand still like Joshua. He goes to hills outside of town, and he pronounces, Shemesh begivon dom v'rech ba'yalon. Okay? Sun should stand still. Of course, nothing happens. But that's the breaking point for the rabbis of the city. And they summon him and they threaten him. They say, if you keep this up, we'll put you in cherem. They got him in a manic mood. And so he says, you put me in cherem, I'll put you in cherem. Kartoni ovim mimosni avicha. Like Rechavam said to the Jewish people, my little finger, meaning my little finger is fatter than your waist. I'm smarter than all of you put together, and I put you in cherem. This is not America, where the young can get away with any kind of chutzpah you want, and everybody says this is not cute. This is the old school. In the old school, if you go and curse and threaten the rabbis of the city, you're out of there. And so, let's put it this way. The chief rabbi, Rabbi Yosef Iskava, he's the Rosh Yosef from the tour, was a smart cookie. And he can see, as they say in the Talmud about the Ben Sora Mur, Nidin Hashem Sofa, he said, this is going bad. This guy's going to be a lot of trouble. And it's not a solvable problem. And so he wants to get him bumped off. That's how they handled matters in the 15th, 16th, 1700s. Okay? That's what they do. But in the end, it would have been a better idea. You see? Now, in the end, they don't. He gets simply kicked out of town. But like in contemporary abuse cases nowadays, what's the number one problem? They throw the guy out of town, but they what? They don't tell anybody else in the other town what the problem is. Right? He's fired for being a Rebbe here, but he ends up over there. He's fired from being a Sheikhet here, right? He's fired from being a Sheikhet here, and he ends up something. Oh, I can tell you. He ends up being a Sheikhet somewhere else. So he's out of town, but they don't tell. So the other communities don't know. Plus the Shonsh Plumem shows nothing changes. So off he goes to Salonika, which is not that far away. Here is Izmir, Smyrna, and here's Salonika. So you see, it's just across the Aegean, I guess it is. And, these are the leading Jewish communities of the Sephardim in Turkey. This is the 1600s when the Sephardic culture very strong, the rabbinic culture very strong. Salonika I mean, I don't know, to use Ashkenazi, to think of like Vilna or something like that. You know, I mean, there's a Ir Ve'ein B'Yisrael with many schools and academies and great, learning and all that sort of thing. So he goes off to Salonika. The community has to go off by himself. All the parents take their kids and say, "You're not going." And for a while, when he lands in Salonika, he's in a normal mood. At such times, he's charming and charismatic. He attracts a new set of disciples. And after all, I mean, they're impressed. He doesn't eat. He goes to mikvah. He fasts a lot. He learns it, 24 hours at a time, 36 hours at a time. But then the mania eventually kicks in, and he starts doing the Shema Mefarish again, pronouncing God's name and all the rest of it. And to top it off, he invites a bunch of rabbis, because Salonika was a city full of famous rabbis, to a meal in which he has a ceremony in which he marries a Sefer Torah. Okay? As he brings out a Sefer Torah over there, and he actually puts a ring on, he says, "All right, Mekudeshes," and all this kind of stuff. He's in manic mood. I don't know why people look at me with a crinkled face. I mean, this is what people can do. And by the way, as soon as the rabbi Salonika see that, they say, "You are hitting the road, baby, this time." They say, "We got no time for this." And so out of Salonika he goes, but once again, they don't tell. He goes, "Why tell?" And so he goes to Constantinople. Okay? But in Constantinople, same thing. He starts saying the Shema Mefarish. Here he does a new shtick. He goes to the market, he buys a big fish, he wraps it up in baby clothes, he puts it in a crib, he walks in the street, pushing a carriage, and singing Spanish lullabies to it. Okay? Now for believers, of course, that means like this. It's Mazel Dogim. It's the zodiac, it's Pisces, it means the Geula is going to come in February, and all that kind of stuff. Okay. What does it mean to everybody else? Cuckoo, okay? You see? And now, so it's very strange. So here, I'm trying to show you what a complex individual this is, and yet, how do people, kind of react to it? He celebrates the Sholosh Regalim all in a week. Notice, tonight, he sits in the sukkah, and tomorrow morning he benches a lulav. The following night is a seder. Next night he does tikkun shavuos. These are just weirdisms. Now you see, the Jewish community is used to apostasy. The Jewish community is dealing with heresy. The Jewish community is dealing with renegades, malshinim, thieves, whores, bandits. That kind of stuff is the good old, that's the way it goes. Like the Rambam says, you'll never get rid of that kind of stuff. This is different. Agree? This is different. What I just said, would you regard that as heretical? As cuckoo. You see? And yes, but what do? He celebrates the Shalosh Regalim. He has a vision that tells him to do sins and recite a new bracha. Right? We say in the morning, Matir Asurim, which literally many people, by the way, get this wrong. Matir Asurim means he frees those who are imprisoned. Or if you wish, he loosens the bonds. Right? Asur in Hebrew literally means tied up. So Matir means to untie. But he said, no, he's through the Matir Isurim, He permits that which is forbidden. Okay? And again, it's like weird. Okay? So go eat on a fast day or something like that, or eat something treif. I don't think he actually ate treif, as I recall. Later on, the Sabbatians did, but I don't think he did that. But he, ate at weird times, like on a fast day or something like that, or maybe like chametz on Pesach, and he'll say, you make a bracha matir isurim. What do you do with this? Here, now this is Constantinople. This is the capital of the Turkish Empire. The Turks are tough, and so the rabbinical courts are tough. So if he goes in the street and starts eating this and making a bracha like that and saying God's name, he's flogged. Okay, they still had Beis Dins that time. He gets malchus, as they call it here. He's kicked out of town, but again, without warning anybody else. Isn't that amazing? So it's an old attitude that didn't start today. He traveled to Greece, because that's the area over there of the map. I mean, he was in Izmir, and then he went to Salonika, and he went to Constantinople, and now they threw him out of here. His family was around originally from the area of Greece, and the Morea, as they call it. So, he goes there for quite a while, running from place to place. And so you'd be in a town, and this guy comes for Shabbos, and nobody knows what to do with him, in the sense that he's going to eat. He does eat on Shabbos, because a Kabbalist does not fast on Shabbos. You eat 4 meals, right? Shalosh Shodas and also the Mla Malka. But then you don't eat. And you, as I say, stay for whole times without sleeping and learn. And you go over and over again to the river for the mikvah, and you do this and you do that. But then a few days later he's gone. So it just gives you something to talk about. After all, there wasn't any TV in those days or books or anything. Eventually, he goes to Israel, Eretz Yisrael, but not directly. He goes the sea route. I want to remind you, there was a constant war going on at that time throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. Crete was the main theater of operations. The Republic of Venice held Crete. The Ottomans were sending army after army to conquer Crete. The Venetians were sinking the navy. The Ottomans were sinking the counter navy. So if you want to go to Egypt, it's not Pashut. And so he has to go in a very roundabout way. But rather than go directly to Israel, go first to Egypt. And when he gets to Egypt, he gets to Alexandria. And in Alexandria, it so happens to be that at the time he landed, he was a normal. Because these people can't control. And so he was a normal for a while. And he's, as I say, he's learned, he's charming, he's astute, he's charismatic. And he makes a chassid from the one guy that counts in Egypt, which is El Supremo. Rafal Yosef, he's the Chalebi, or the Nagid, as they used to call it. If you know how Egypt worked, from way back when, in the early Middle Ages, after all, Egypt is the headquarters of the pharaohs from ancient time. They like top-down government, correct? Centralized top-down government. And so the Jews were expected to have a similar pattern. And so the king or the ruler would appoint the head Jew, and that guy controls it. He's the dictator for all the other Jews. And at the time we're talking about, it was Rafal Yosef, who was a Syrian Jew, who was a very frum guy, as a renowned Baal Tzedakah. And he himself was a Lurianic Kabbalist who used to fast a lot. And he was a multimillionaire. And his family, they say, ate wonderfully. He never ate. And he had 50 rabbis every day at the table, and he supported yeshivas. He's a very interesting individual, and he didn't oppress the Jewish community, at least more than necessary, in terms of the taxes. And so here's a person, and he was, by the way, in charge of he was like the Secretary of the Treasury of the governor of Egypt. So it's a high position. So he's the Jew that counts, and he thinks this guy that landed off the boat is great. You understand? He thinks he's great. And so here, Shabtai Tzvi, as long as he's there, he lives the life of Riley. I'm just giving an idea. We don't know enough about this. It's fascinating. Who else was at his table being supported at that time? The son of Chaim Vital, or Shmuel Vital, who has the manuscripts that they won't let anybody publish. If you want to do a novel, here it is. Two guys at the table. One guy's making up his own Kabbalah. The other guy has the original stuff, but he won't let anybody see it. And then there's the rich guy who's a Lurian Kabbalist, but is too frum of a guy to go and steal or take anything from anybody. It's the stuff of movies. Apparently, they regard his Mishigasin as spiritual happenings. He does end up doing some crazy things over there, but it all depends how you look at it. Since they regard him as a positive individual, if he says the Shem HaMeforish, must be some Kabbalistic reason, Because I see he's not a Machal Shabbos. He's not a lowlife. He doesn't go eat treif. He doesn't do this. He doesn't chase women. He doesn't do, all the sorts of things that sinners typically do. So then the Mishigas is a Kabbalistic Mishigas. And then it's Mashehu Miyuchad. It singles him out as somebody special. Okay. After a couple months, he moves to Yerushalayim, 36 years old, 1642. He's still not married. He's in a normal mood when he reaches Jerusalem. That's always his mazel, right? When he shows him Yerushalayim, he's in a normal mood. This was, in 1662, a very interesting period in the history of Israel, of Jerusalem. It's the era of Rabbi Yaakov Chagiz, if that name means anything, but I guess it doesn't, who was a kind of a Torah Zionist, you might say. This is in the 17th century. Rabbi Yaakov is a Moroccan rabbi, Sephardic. He's a big Talmud Chacham, and he has a plan to try to revive a Jewish settlement in Israel by building super yeshiva, and then attracting a lot of people in there, and then they'll attract others. And he goes to Livorno, to Leghorn in Italy. That's over here, which was the rich Sephardic community in Italy. That's where he had the millionaires. And he gets the Reichmans of Leghorn, the Vega family, to bankroll big money to set up a nice-sized yeshiva with a good endowment in Jerusalem. And he moves there in 1658. And it's actually a very interesting period in the history of let me put it this way. This is when the modern Aliyah begins for the Sephardim, not the Ashkenaz, for the Sephardim. And he builds up something impressive over there. His students include, the Prichada, Shemesh Ragil, a lot of very big people. and all the rest of it. This person very big in Gemara. He's a very famous posek. If you're in the rabbi business, you'll know Yaakov Chagiz. He's the one who say you can drink water on Yom Kippur. He's a shalos and tubas halachas ketanas. So that's why rabbis, if they're finding a situation where somebody medically is required to drink, they will some drink water. At least according to the Yaakov Chagiz, it's not a violation. You understand? So what I'm trying to say is he's a serious posek. And now this guy shows up, who is studying Egypt. They haven't heard that he was kicked out of Izmir. They never heard he walked a fish down the road singing lullabies. You understand? They didn't see all this sort of thing. And he is, for a fair while that he's there, in the normal phase. So he joins the yeshiva, welcoming, they want people from scholars all over the place to Israel to build up the population. He learns with others at Chavrusa. He begins to attract, as always, some disciples who want to learn Kabbalah with him, because the yeshiva is not a Kabbalistic yeshiva, it's a regular yeshiva. Here he resumed his former ascetic practice of frequent fastings and other penances. Many see this as proof of his extraordinary piety. That's always how he got people. And I'll say it again, you can't simply say it's a fake or something like this, because nobody goes without eating for a week just to fake people out. You either really believe this stuff or you don't. He was said to have a good voice, and so he always sang Tehillim all night long. Hear what I said? He sang Tehillim all night long, and sometimes Spanish love songs. Because no, wait a second. He's a Sephardi, and in the Sephardi culture, it's not my culture, but you go Seattle and these kind of places, they're into, it sounds funny. They sing these chasanas. It's strange to Ashkenaz. They sing, oh, my beautiful dove, and this and that and the other. And he interprets it, of course, Kabbalistically. The dove is not a bird. It really refers to Klal Yisrael, all that kind of stuff. And so he's not your typical boring rabbi that walks down the street dime a dozen in Yerushalayim, And he gives mystical interpretation. He attracts crowds of listeners. At other times, he prays and cries at the graves of tzaddikim. He goes to Hebron. He gives out candy to the children on the street, and he gathers a circle of adherents. On the other hand, he's not going to stand out as an outstanding master of Kabbalistic knowledge in Jerusalem at that time. In the time of Yaakov Chagiz, Yerushalayim is the headquarters of Lurianic Kabbalism. Tzfat disappeared because there was a war between the governor of Tzfat and the governor of Damascus, and the Jewish community in Tzfat was wiped out. So in the time I'm talking about, the Jews are living in Yerushalayim, or they're not living anywhere. And people like Rabbi Yaakov Tzemach and others who were famous, Mukabolim, and Talmidim, Rabbi Chaim Vital, and others, are all in Yerushalayim. But when he gets his manic moods, because eventually it kicks in, even Yerushalayim, they view it as Nebuch mental illness. Though he seems to have been flogged on a number of occasions. It's strange. They don't, he's not a typical heretic. He's not apostatizing. He's not joining another religion. It doesn't say he's going Machal Shabbos. He doesn't, he does strange things. And so they don't know what to do with it. But then, after a while, these crazy moods leave him. And, of course, if he's depressed, he's locked in a room, you don't see him. And if he's normal, you see him in there. So you say, he's a very good guy. Nebuch, every once in a while, he has these attacks. That's what we say. I could just see it. If there were nice people, and they were nice people in Yerushalayim, they say, listen, the guy's a Talmud Chacham, all the rest of it. He has issues, So, we try to, if he screamed in the middle of shul, don't say nothing. It's like that. That's how they treated him. At that time, after a year or so, the Turkish governor, as was common, jacks up the taxes very heavily to hurt the Jews. Like doubles and triples the taxes overnight. The Jewish community is desperate. And they send Shabtai Tzvi, this new guy who showed up, back to Egypt to be a fundraiser, because we heard that he was a favorite with the rich guy in Egypt, which he was, Rafal Yosef. And so he goes, and he raises a ton of money from the guy, and he sends it back to Yerushalayim, and he remains in Egypt. By now, we're told, in Egypt, the waves of depression are so debilitating that he forgot about being a Mashiach. Okay? It just got to him so much, he basically gave it up. And if the story had ended now, it'd be interesting on a human being level, but wouldn't have a national Jewish significance. But two events in 1665 stimulate or revive his messianic pretensions. His strange marriage and his meeting with Nathan of Gaza. These two events, launch an international spasm of Jewish frenzy, but that's something we'll attack next time. Good night.